and thankful and grateful to the Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies, Glassman family, Adam, Linda, Anya, Sternschist, who is not here, for inviting me for the first time in my life to Canada, to Toronto. And thank you very much. I'm very excited. Okay. So the Drake was a dragon, and this is the actual title of what I would like to say, When the Dragon Was a Bridge, Fairy Tales in Old Yiddish Literature. This is basically the program of today's presentation. This I decided to also mention what I'm not going to talk about, because usually I have so many things to say that I feel very pressed and I want to say everything, and then and so I decided, okay, perhaps about those things I just won't talk, or I will mention them en passant. And I would like to make a very short introduction to Old Yiddish literature, because my students heard that already, but perhaps not, they didn't hear that in Toronto. But sometimes when I started to study Old Yiddish, they told me, but Yiddish is already old. What is Old Yiddish? And in Italy, nobody heard about Yiddish, of course. And I never heard a single word in Yiddish, also in my family. And once, when I was younger, someone asked me, what is Yiddish? And I said, what are you doing? I'm studying Yiddish. I said, oh, Yiddish, I never smoked it. So this is the place where I'm coming from. And so a very short history. You know that we have already some Yiddish glosses in manuscripts from the 12th century. The first, I would say, text that we have is a literary text and has been discovered in 2011 in Köln, and is the text that you find on these slates. It has been deciphered and it looks like that. And Erika Timm in Germany published an article about that. This is the Chivalry novella. The source has not been found yet, apparently, but it's probably of the from German culture of the period. And it was composed before 1349. This becomes, in fact, the first text we have in Yiddish. The first big text we have, we call it the Cambridge manuscript. We know that there are a lot of manuscripts in Cambridge, but the Cambridge manuscript of Yiddish is this one. It's dated 1382 and is a collection of literary texts. It was found in the Geniza and Kahir, and we have here original poems and a chivalry poem as well, based on German literature. Again, the source of the German chivalry poem has not been found, but what it's very important for me to say is that we see that thanks to this amazing manuscript, that Yiddish was in 1382 already a literary language, a language with a literary tradition. These two texts, as you can imagine, have something they look like a miraculous discovery, because one has been found on slates, on stones, yes, and the other one has been found in the Geniza and Kahir. This can perhaps give an idea that, unfortunately, probably a lot of other interesting material of Yiddish literature have been lost, and what we have is really very few. That's why also every discovery is so exciting for us. In this very short presentation, I just wanted to show a manuscript. This is a miscellanea manuscript from Italy. And I'm going to go very fast. And I just want to mention among the printed books, because we are going to mention that later, the Q-book, the Q-book, which is the Book of Cow, which is a collection of stories printed in Verona 1595 with illustrations, and it's a collection of fables based on both Hebrew and German sources. So from these few words, you can understand already that there is so much and so many questions that can be connected to that, to these works. And now we go to the main topic of my lecture, and this is the Mayse-bukh. The Mayse-bukh was printed for the first time in 1602, and it is a result of a tradition that is attested already before. We have two manuscripts from northern Italy, which present most of the stories that later we find in the printed edition of 1602. That is, I considered it a book of the 16th century. And it is a fascinating book. And I would like to read with you the introduction, and first the front page and the introduction, which, yes, you see the font, the characters. These are called today Tsur, Otiot, Tsur Oisies. The letters used to print the Zenerenne, but once was called Weiberteich. But in Basel, the printing were very beautiful, so much so that the first edition that arrived to us of the Zenerenne, the famous book of Ashkenazi Jews, shows that it was printed in Basel. It's not true. It was printed in Hanau, but they said Basel because they wanted to sell and they wanted to show how beautiful the letters were. Yeah, but yes, are very beautiful. I'm going to read the English and not the Yiddish, but if you have questions later, of course, you can tell me. A beautiful book of stories, a Mayse-bukh. Come here, dear men and women, and look at the beautiful Mayse-bukh, which never before was brought to print since the world existed, with 300 and some stories, Maisim, that are all based on the Gemara, and also from the Rabbata and Bechaye, and you will not miss any of the stories of Yehuda Hasid as well, as from Sefer Hasidim and Sefer Musar, and from the Yalkut, as you will see below in the index, the Simonim. Therefore, you dear women, you have in front of you all the Yiddish books. Now you have a Yiddish Gemara, so you will have the whole Torah. Should be a rhyme. And this is the Yiddish text, and I want to thank Linda for revising my translation. I think it's very important and very interesting. Only to God, blessed his name, is the honor, since he helped me to realize my desire, which I had for a long time, to serve the pious women. I prepared for print many holy books, but they are all nothing in comparison to this work, since rabbis and rebbetzins and every man will read it. Even one who knows a lot of the Gemara will extract from it many midrashim and stories and legends, so that the whole world will remain open-mouthed, and each one will have to say, I believe he knows the whole Torah on one foot. Who saw someone like him? To everything he has a story about what happened in a specific case. Sometimes one might encounter a story that will cause him to abandon his evil thoughts and evil deeds, since many fables and stories can teach much good and maintain many close to virtue and honor. Therefore, you dear men and women, read it often so that you will become an expert in it. And do not read from the Book of Cows, and also from Dietrich von Bern and Meinster Hildebrand. You should not make an effort to read, since they are worth mere vapor. They do not give either warmth or heat, and besides, they are not godly. You need that God shall forgive you. Our holy books write that it is a sin as big as a house to read them during the Holy Shabbat. Do you want to spend your time reading? So I will write for you a beautiful book of stories. And therefore, you dear women, buy them, the printed copies, immediately before they get into foreign countries, in Bohemia and in Rus and in Poland, And so they, the Jews of those countries, will grasp them boldly, and in other lands more. Therefore, buy them a lot. Later you will say, "Oi, why did I not buy why did I not buy it? And when they were in the country, now I would gladly pay $1 if I just couldn't find it one soon. And therefore, do not let $1 to be too expensive for you. So shall God protect you from evil and the monstrous Amen Selah." So this is a nice sales pitch, a nice example of a paratext. Paratext is everything that is around the text. It can be an introduction, a preface, a title, the simonim, yes, an index. What I learned many things from this text. So as you see, first of all, you can learn that this book was meant for men and women, for cultivated and less cultivated Jews. It says that it can be used by darshanim, people who give droshes in the synagogue, because they give them stories if they want to. Especially, it says that you should not read other books. Books of fables, the Book of Cows that you saw before, and what is Dietrich von Bern and Meister Hildebrand? They are rewritings of German chivalry literature of the period. And so he's saying, don't read fables, don't read chivalry literature, read my book. My book is godly. Yes, the other books are not. And you should not read those books on Shabbat. I have a lot to say, but yes, everything I say, there is a lot to say around, but let's go on. And of course, you see another point which is very important, that when you print a book, you print it for all European Jews. It is true the market of printed Yiddish books was quite big, from Venice to Prague, from Krakow to Amsterdam. And the Maisa-Bukh also not only was sold everywhere, but was reprinted many times. And we can say that it is the most famous collection of prose stories in Old Yiddish. What I learned is that it is dangerous to believe to this paratext, because sometimes they say something different from what they bring you to expect something different from what in fact you find inside the text. It seems that there are godly books and ungodly books, but this is not the truth, because inside the Mayse-bukh there are at least 3 stories which appear also in the Book of Cows. And there are, of course, stories from the Talmud and stories from medieval Ashkenazi geography. But there are also novellas which are very, very daring, with a prince that has love stories with 3 sisters and all kind, with no moral at all. And all those stories are inside the same book. The same printer, which had also the functions, I would say, of today's editor, in the same publishing house, in the same year, in the same place, published also the devised Mayse-bukh, that, as you can see, no, perhaps you cannot see, but it's a rewriting of a German text, so very ungodly. Yeah, nicht göttlich. And he says a lot of things that were said before. Perhaps later, for those who know Yiddish, I can read it. It's very easy, but are the same topics. Not so, you don't have Yiddish Gemara, but still many topoi that we found in our Mayse-bukh can be found in the devised Meister. I'm trying to understand the Mayse-bukh as a book, first of all, and not as a random collection of stories. And some of the stories that are inside brought me to revise something we read before in the introduction. This I can read in Yiddish. Lass mir hören ein bisschen ein Yiddish Wort, ja? Zu Zeiten wurden sich Mencher an einem Meise stoßen, sein böse Machscheuves und böse Werk ablossen. Denn Menschen Moschel und Meise tut Menschen viel Guts lehren. Erhalt Menschen bei Gut und bei Ehren. Sometimes one might encounter a story that will cause him to abandon his evil thoughts and evil deeds, since many fables and stories can teach much good and maintain many close to virtue and honor. Now this theme of a kind of belles lettres, of sifrut chol, of literary texts that are not really something that strengthens our faith or our observance of the precepts and so on, but they give us pleasure. They have a function. This is a very old topos, a theme that we find in Hebrew and non-Hebrew literature, that reading cleans and keeps us busy. And it's a kind of justification of fiction within texts that usually are meant to teach more moral and ethic behavior and, as I said, observance of the precepts. And now to the drake or dragon. Okay. There is a story about a Jew. His name was Ben Sover. And I want to write, I would write only the English, an excerpt. Yes. Because it made me think a lot. Okay. When the pious man was on his journey home, he came to a very high mountain upon which grew the most luscious fruit in the whole world. But everyone who passed by was bound to die, for the place was full of all kinds of poisonous worms and reptiles, and the moment they smelled a human being, they killed him. And there was also a large dragon there. The good man, Ben Sover, walked over the dragon, thinking it was a billy goat. As he passed the dragon, he met a man of very ugly appearance, who was the angel of death, and who asked him who he was. Okay, now in the Yiddish, I made it a bit bold. The word is bukh, and it is always translated as billy goat, a bok. Yes, in today's Yiddish. And it's interesting because in all the reprints of the Mayse-bukh, this mistake remains, because what we found in one of the Italian manuscripts of the former versions of the Mayse-bukh, we found the story, which is very similar, but instead of a book, there is a brook. And brücke is a bridge. Okay? If we go to Hebrew versions of that, and now I don't have the time to show it to you, but we discover that at a certain moment of the transmission of the text, a river became a mountain, the Nahar became a har, a crocodile became a dragon, a tanin, and the bridge became a billy goat. Yes? But it is only in a fictional text that mistakes such as Nahar, which becomes har, do not look as such. Instead, they become part of the tradition of the text, become possible in the logic, this is what I would like to argue, of the fairy tale. And I wanted to say something more, but I want to move to the next story. This is one of my favorite stories, The Talking Frog and the Jewish Tristan. Now, I cannot read you all the story. Those are the main characters, and allow me to go to read from what I wrote, because the story is very long, it's many pages, and I will give you a shorter version as I said, before I get lost in this magic forest. The hero is Rabbi Hanina, the son of a rich and pious man who is close to the king. Rabbi Hanina, in order to fulfill his father's last wish, goes to the marketplace on Passover Eve to buy whatever is offered for sale first. The object happens to be a silver casket, inside of which there was a frog merrily dancing and jumping about. Okay, the frog grows and grows until it consumed all that Rabbi Hanina possessed. And when he and his wife go to the chamber where the frog is kept to inform him that they have used up all their provisions, the frog says, "My dear Rabbi Hanina, do not regret that you have brought me up and nourished me. Ask of me whatever you wish, and I will give it to you." Rabbi Hanina responds that his greatest desire would be to know the whole Torah. And the frog teaches him the whole Torah and the 70 languages, as well as the language of the beasts and the birds. This frog would write words on a piece of paper and give it to Rabbi Hanina to swallow. Oh, I would like it to work. Okay. In a forest called Elani, the frog summoned all the beasts, commanding them to bring precious stones and medicinal roots and herbs for the wife. After having blessed them, the frog announces, "I am the son of Adam, who begot me by Lilith during the 130 years that he was separated from Eve. God has given me the power to assume any shape or form I like." The first part of the story ends with Rabbi Hanina and his wife returning home, the rabbi held in high esteem by the king of Israel, who was a wicked man. Part 2 opens with the king deciding to seek a bride. A black raven appears and prays God to protect Hanina, and another bird does the same, and the hero hears and understands their language. While the elders are suggesting to the king that he marry, a bird appears and drops a long hair, the color of gold, onto the shoulder of the king. The king decides that he will marry only the woman to whom that hair belongs, and the rabbi is forced to seek her. Aidisher Mazel. The reader is now taken into an enchanted space in which Hanina alone must overcome many trials. He gives food to a raven and a dog, and he buys a fish only to release it into the water. It was not a carp, otherwise it would never could have. Later, these animals will assist him in his quest. Hanina finally does find the queen. She conditions her agreement to follow him to the king upon 2 requests. It's a really long story. First, to bring her 2 jars of water, one from paradise and one from hell. These are magical waters with the powers to kill and heal and revive. And second, to find a ring she lost in the sea. The fish that was saved by Rabbi Hanina goes to the Leviathan and tells him about the Jew and the ring. And the Leviathan calls the fish together and orders them to find the ring. They succeed in their research, but a wild boar comes and swallows the ring. To make a long story short, back at the court of the king, the evil sages kill the hero, but the queen, using the magic water from paradise, brings him back to life. The king asks to be killed and brought back to life by the queen. She agrees, but uses only the first water, and the king disappears. Rabbi Hanina marries the beautiful queen and becomes king of Israel, since in the meantime, apparently, his former wife has quietly died. How am I with the time? So the Rabbi Hanina story, as you have seen, is rich in motives from old sources, legends, the story about Adam and Lilith and the helpful animals, but it also includes aspects of the story of Tristan and Isolde. And now I would like to go a moment back to the Middle Ages. The so-called Matter of Britain, the cycles of stories around King Arthur and the Round Table, and since the 13th century, the story of Tristan and Isolde within it, was understood already in the Middle Ages as a lie, as a fictional matter. In the following centuries, the fictionality of the Matter of Britain found a wide reception in Italian literature as well. The matter became a source for entertainment literature about imaginary heroes and heroines, fairies and animals with magical powers from an enchanted world. This fictional reception can also be found among a Jewish audience that showed great interest in it. In Yiddish rewritings of King Arthur's cycle, as well as others reworkings of chivalry matters, are among the most popular works of the 16th and 17th century among Ashkenazi Jews. But as I mentioned before, en passant, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. Most of the Yiddish literature of this 16th century come from Italy, where Ashkenazi Jews established several communities, especially, of course, in Padova, Venezia, Verona, Mantova, Cremona, and so on. And this is what I would like to show you. And this is, I'm moving to the last section of my presentation. Back to Italy. In the same time, basically, in which the Mayse-bukh, or I would say, the first group of stories from the Mayse-bukh started to circulate, in that moment, especially in Venice, again, where the Jewish Ashkenazi was a very important Jewish Ashkenazi community, circulated stories that circulated this book. Stories which are fairy tales, are a collection of fairy tales. Now, I would like to suggest, this is what I would like to argue, that I'm not talking about Le Piacevoli Notti. Perhaps you heard also about Basile, Lo Conto degli Conti, the story of stories, which was written in literary Napoletan and immediately translated into French. And also Le Piacevoli Notti was printed several times and translated into French, German, Spanish. It was a big success. What I want to say is that already in the 15th century, but very much more in the 16th century, the novella that we know from Boccaccio, but also from before, melted in a way, was transformed in what we call le fiabe di magia, or fairy tales, stories of magic. And among those stories of magic, we have a story, the story of Livoretto and Belisandra, which is basically the same story that we had in the Mayse-bukh. But it's a completely different version, but it's still the story of Tristan and Isolde the Blonde, yes? But what I want to say is that, what I'm trying to say basically is something very new in a way that nobody said it before. So what I'm showing you, I'm trying to publish it, and I'm really happy if you can give me some suggestions or remarks. I try to say that instead of looking back at the possible sources, we should think about, ask ourselves, how were those stories read by the Jews in the 16th century and in the 17th century? Now, the Italian version, yes, is completely different. In Straparola's story, Livoretto enters into the service of the Soldano in Cairo after losing all his possessions and so on and so on. And then you have also L'acqua della vita, the water of life. And at the end, they marry, and he becomes the new king of Cairo. The similarities between the stories of Rabbi Hanina and Livoretto, for me, raise complex questions of a cultural contact and transmission. We don't know the direct source of each story in the Mayse-bukh, even when we possess similar versions in Hebrew, Aramaic, Yiddish, and in other languages as well. In all likelihood, the story of Rabbi Hanina and the frog, even when registered in different Hebrew versions, were probably composed, I like the term poaching, you say that? Poaching materials, to use the Certeau's term, from other languages, probably vernaculars. And in the vernacular, it could have been transmitted. These unresolved questions notwithstanding, this is a difficult word, it is obvious that collections of stories like the Mayse-bukh and Le Piacevoli Notti are contemporaneous and share many characteristics, which I would like to show here. They are books of stories, they are registered in the vernacular, they are written in prose, they both originate from northern Italy, they date to the 16th century, and they belong to a culture that knows print. Printing means that not suddenly, but slowly, no. Okay, gradually, the reading public started to look more and more for reading matters, all kinds of reading matters. And sometimes we feel, when we look at the Yiddish literature of the period, that the printers were looking for something to print. So I think that the fact that we are already in the age of print has an impact on the reception of those stories. But I would like to add something. And that I think that if we go back, so let me go back to Boccaccio a moment. Ancora uno? Okay. Boccaccio, in his introduction, I mentioned Boccaccio, but there are other collections, books of stories in the period. He writes like that. Intendo di raccontare 100 novelle o favole o parabole o storie che dire le vogliamo. I found a translation that says, I propose to tell 100 tales or fables or parables or stories or what you will. It means, what I want to say is that in the, in the Boccaccio, in Boccaccio's Decameron, there are, we know that he wrote novellas, yes? It's the apogeo, how to say apogeo? Apogeo of the novella. But he reworked many other subgenres. And I believe that inside the Mayse-bukh there are also many subgenres. Yes, so I would like to suggest that the source of the matters in Hebrew, in Yiddish, in vernacular, written, oral, of the stories of the Mayse-bukh, the question of the matters is not the main question. Straparola's story on Livoretto and Rabbi Hanina's Yiddish wonderful adventures share the same kind of reception, that of the fairy tales. And this is what I wanted to basically tell you today. This would indicate not only that the Mayse-bukh includes several subgenres of what was called the forma brevis, the short form, or la forme brève in French, but that each one of these subgenres implies different ways of reading as well. These possible uses of the text are usually introduced by cues, such as the presence of magic and enchantment, and, on the other side, the lacking of a declared source, as in the case of the story, the stories based on Talmudic Aggadot, of biblical verses, of morals at the end of these stories. Well, I mean, in the Mayse-bukh, usually, when you have a story which is based on the stories of the Aggadot of the Talmud, it is said, this is from Masechet so-and-so, or there is a pasuk, a verse from the Bible, and there is a commentary, or at the end, there is a moral where it said, and therefore you women, you should behave piously, and so on, yes? But in these stories, there is no moral at all, yes? And there are no morals, no indication of the source. So the Mayse-bukh, and I'm concluding, features several examples of lonely heroes, dangerous forests, talking birds and fish, snakes and frogs, magic fruits, wicked kings and beautiful queens, and happy endings. The presence of magic in those stories implies a sort of pact with the reader, who consciously agrees to fall into the trap of fiction. From the point of view of the history of genres in the Middle Ages and the early modern period, the fairy tale is differentiated from both the saga and the leggenda, which is, yes, the saga has its root in collective memory, and leggenda is a credible miracle. The fairy tale genre implies that the reader is able to recognize in it the pleasure given by a fictional dimension. It offers a world in which fantastic desires become realized, and happy endings provide the consolation of poetic justice. In the Mayse-bukh, as well as in other Yiddish collections, one finds other kinds of magic as well. I suggest that while hagiographic magic, like the magic deeds of the rabbis, remains a constant in Hebrew and Yiddish narrative and ought to be considered a longue durée component of Ashkenazi culture from the Middle Ages on. But the marvelous nature of the stories at hand is characteristic of the genre. This is what I would like to say of the fairy tale, which is neither didactic nor hagiographic. It does not teach observance of precepts, and it does not strengthen faith in God and holy men. The constant presence of these stories in a book which contains didactic and ethical teachings indicates that they were not marginal. Readers, it seems, sought in the Mayse-bukh tales that taught them about the observance of laws concerning sexual purity, the Shabbat, the Tzedakah, but also novelle that ushered them into an enchanted, wonderful world in which justice triumphs and wise Jews marry blonde princesses and live happily ever after. Thank you.